talk about a real ADF experience that will be presented by Mano Swerts. He's a technical lead at Ixxus, has been working there for a year now, right? And working with Alfresco for about 8 years, right? You may remember him from the 2012 Alfresco Summit, where he did a talk about Angular and Alfresco, right? So I'll hand over to him now to.
Thank you. So I would like to take next 30 minutes to talk about our experience at Ixxus. So I do not need to introduce myself again, because that did excellently. So as been said, I work at Ixxus and we focus on the publishing sector mostly, and we have been developing applications and solutions with Alfresco from the beginning. So we have a lot of Alfresco experience, have been at a lot of conferences, and we are now a subsidiary of CCC, a big American company. So what I want to cover today is the first thing: what is ADF for the people that don't really know what it is or how it is structured. Why you want to use ADF? So because we already have some solutions to create products or applications for Alfresco, so what brings ADF to the table? How we use ADF currently at Ixxus, our experience with that, and how we will be using ADF in the future. So let me first start with what ADF is. So the ones that are already working with Alfresco for quite some time, maybe remember when we were working still with ad scripts, we didn't have a very specific or standardized way to develop Alfresco applications, which wasn't really a good time. And then two crazy Italians started to create an SDK, a community SDK for everybody to use and to standardize development, which eventually got noticed by Alfresco and turned into the Alfresco SDK that we nowadays know and most of us love. So the next step in that evolution, or maybe next is not really the best word for it, but another step in that evolution is ADF, which is something, a new tool that we can use besides Alfresco SDK, because that's not going to disappear because it targets something else. So basically what ADF is, it is the Alfresco development framework, which basically consists out of two big things. One thing is GeoMan, which is an app generator. So basically it generates an application for you, and that application is an AngularJS 2 application. The fun thing about ADF is that the result is a standard AngularJS application. So if you already know AngularJS development, you really feel at home from the start. So that ADF application that is generated basically consists of three big parts. The core layer, or the lowest layer in that application, is the unified JavaScript API. Basically, Alfresco provides you with a JavaScript API to connect to Alfresco to use the REST APIs that Alfresco provides without you need to do that low-level API calls to the system. On top of that, Alfresco provides you with a lot of AngularJS components. So the objective of that ADF, of that framework, is basically to generate your app, and from that moment on, it's your app. It's not like developing inside Alfresco Share. It's your app from that point of time, and you just mold it the way you like. But of course, the thing in the past is that we didn't do that often because it's a lot of work. You need to create a document list most of the times, and you don't want to do it from scratch. You need to have a login screen that costs a lot of time to develop as well. So Alfresco gives you a couple of AngularJS components that give you that functionality out of the box, and you can decide if you want to use it in your app or you just kick them out. So that is that second layer, those AngularJS components that Alfresco provides. And on top of that, of course, you want to build your own app. It's a unique experience. So you want to provide your own functionality to that application. So in that case, you will be providing or creating your own AngularJS components. And of course, that ADF framework, that application that you generated, won't do a lot of stuff if you don't have an Alfresco server behind it. That's a service layer you see there, or an activity server which you can interact with as well. And the result, if you just generate an application, something like this, you have a beautiful application from the start. So don't worry about design too much at the beginning. So you have something that works out of the box. So why would you want to use ADF? Well, the thing is, we have done a lot of Alfresco share development for now, because share provides you with all the functionality, well, most of the functionality that Alfresco has to offer, which is great. A lot of clients need it, but it's a very generic application. So it doesn't really provide a targeted user experience. It's very overwhelming for some users. And sometimes you just want to do something completely different. In that case, with new framework with ADF, you can quickly spin up an application that has some basic functionality already, browse through documents, look at the content, but then you can start providing your own experience to the user and create an application that they really want and want to use with not too much distractions. It also gives you, of course, freedom of development. Within Share, you're restricted to the extension points that Share has to offer, and if you go beyond that, then you probably get problems with upgrading your platform. And now with ADF, you generate your own application, so from that point on, you have the liberty to do what you want and use a framework that is standardized and which is well known. So you have a lot of freedom regarding development. And like I said before, you can provide a very focused user experience. Another thing that's quite good about ADF is that it generates a responsive application. So we have already, Alfresco provides some mobile SDKs, which is great, but a lot of times we don't have time or budget to create a mobile application and the web application at the same time. So in this case, you can generate one web application that works well on mobile and on the desktop computers. So in that case, you cover all your bases. And maybe the last use case that isn't really the first thing that comes to mind is that you can integrate it with Share if you want to. If the client uses a lot of features from Share and really likes the user interface, but wants some things that would jeopardize your upgrade path, or something that's very difficult to do within Share, you could integrate ADF as well with Share. So how do we use ADF at Ixxus at the time? So when ADF came out, we were very interested in it, and the first thing that you do if you want to test a new technology is create a proof of concept. And it's not really very useful to create a proof of concept if you don't know what you want to build. So we looked into the list of modules that we currently have for Alfresco Share, and looked into that list and see if we had something that we wanted to port to ADF to see how it works and if it's some viable solution for us. So eventually, after some thinking, we came up with our all-in-one edit module. So basically, this module is something we created for Alfresco Share. And we in the publishing sector, probably other sectors as well, notice that a lot of clients want to edit a bunch of metadata, but read the content or even edit the content at the same time. So they really need those two pieces of information on one screen easily readable. So what we did is we created a form, because by default that's not possible in Alfresco Share. So we created a page form that bundles those two pieces of content in one view. So as you can see here, this is a screenshot of that plugin. It's a very big form with even new components like autocomplete components. And here you see that the content is inline, editable, and readable by the user. And this big form has even a multi-column layout. You have some very fast components to upload even extra content, assets, added associations, etc., etc. So we thought that that might be a good thing to try to build in ADF. So of course, we had some requirements, some very simple requirements to start. The first thing is it needs to be configurable. We don't want to develop a form for every client from scratch. So we want something that we can configure, the columns, the fields that need to be displayed, where they need to be persistent. And we also need it to be user-friendly, of course. Otherwise, you don't have any point in creating it. And the last requirement is that it needs to be easy to deploy. You already know how to deploy Share. It's very straightforward. You don't want something that's way more complicated to get to the client. So how did we build it? Well, the first thing, we had two visions in mind. So like I said before, one of those illustrations would be a standard ADF application. So completely standalone, the user really uses that application and does not use share. And another point of view that we had to try to develop is what if a user tries to use share and wants to use a component as well, can be integrated. So if you look at this architecture view, the left side is the ADF application. And you can see what we want to do is, in this case, use the default document list component that's available in ADF. Because why change it if it already works? And add a new action to it so that the user can select the document and start editing. To do that, we need to have, of course, a nice view with that form that I showed you first, with all those fields, with the content embedded in it. So to do that, within ADF, we need to create a view, a component basically, a standard AngularJS component. So if you know AngularJS development, that's something that you already know how to do. And of course, how must I say this? The key point to keep in mind is that you try to build as simple components as possible. So we could have created just one all-in-one added component and put everything in there. But the core of the ADF framework is components. So what you want to do is keep them as simple and as small as possible so you can reuse them. So in this case, we see three components that we want to use. One is an edit form component, so the form itself that we can configure to show the column, show the fields, and other components to edit or view the content on the same page. So we can use our Alfresco file view component, which is by default included, which is great. Don't reinvent the wheel. But we also want to edit content that's already there. So what we did is we created a TinyMC component to be able to edit plain text or HTML content in the system. That's all fine and well. So we have that and we try to develop that. But what if somebody wants to share? We don't want to code that again. So we want to reuse that code and, well, with the least effort as possible. So another thing that we try to do is create that same action in share, but then try to propagate the session that you have in Alfresco share because you're authenticating that application, propagate it to ADF, and redirect the user to ADF. And the user really doesn't know that if you make sure that the layout and design is a bit similar, doesn't really know that it's using another application. It needs to be a very seamless experience. So the first thing that we did to make this work, of course, is prepare our environment. You can't have an ADF application without having Alfresco. So what you first need, of course, Alfresco version 5.2 or higher. So that's maybe the downside of this. It uses the new REST API, so you can't use a very old version of Alfresco. You can also use community version if you like. And you need to enable course on Alfresco and activity, otherwise it won't work. But there is a model for that you just install. And we like to be fancy, so we use Docker for that, but you don't really have to if you don't want to. If you want to use activity, it's not, if you don't use it, you don't need it, well, don't install it. But if you want to use it as well in your application, you need activity 1.5.2.1 or higher, and you need to update that default activity using Alfresco as well, if you want to use the default on the box configuration. And you need Node.js, a specific version or higher as well, to make ADF work. So basically with the copy commands, in our case, one single command to set up Alfresco, and a command to install those dependencies and generate that, like 6 commands, you have an ADF application ready to go. Of course, without the modifications that we are about to make, but we have that default application ready. So that edit form component that I talked about, the thing is, by default, ADF does not include a component to edit metadata for documents, which seems a bit absurd, but I already talked about that yesterday to someone. So what we did to avoid reinventing the wheel and generate a lot of code ourselves is we used the existing component, which is an activity form component in the ADF, to enter metadata in the process. We just copied that and we started modifying that to create a form that is able to edit metadata for a node. And the fun thing about that is that form for activity is already configurable. And that was one of our requirements, so that came out of the box basically. And such a component looks like this. It's basically a very basic AngularJS component. There's nothing specific to Alfresco. So you create a component with your logic in the TypeScript file. You have your HTML file to display the component itself, how you want it to display on a page. Some CSS to make it fancy. And you export and register that component in the add module.ts file, which is the same thing for every AngularJS application. And what we also have in this form is we have a bunch of other components that we call widgets here included, so that, for example, an input text field or a drop-down or an autocomplete field are all separate widgets. So if tomorrow we want to have a new type of input in our form, we just add a new widget that is configurable and we're done. We don't need to completely change the flow of the form. So, and that configuration is basically just a JSON file. So you can, for every type of document you have, you can specify how many columns you want, what fields you want to display, where they need to be stored. So it's basically, we have a component, and we can reuse that in every project. It's just a matter of configuring a JSON file for every type of document you have. So all the other components work in the same way. So they're not different in terms of development. You just have the same type of files that you use. Of course, the logic is different, otherwise it wouldn't be a different component. So if you have all those components ready, so the TinyMC one, edit form one that we create ourselves, we want to include them in a view. And the view in AngularJS is basically another component. It's all very, very consistent. So like you see, the files are basically the same thing. You have a TypeScript file with some logic that you want to execute. You have an HTML, CSS file, and you can export that module in the index.ts file, and you register it in the add module file. The only thing that's different for a view is that you also register a URL in the routes file to it. Because of course you need to know where that view will be available. But the essence is the same thing. And that component then includes all the other components that we create. So we have a very modular approach. So if you want to reuse an edit form in another page, we can simply do that without any issue. The last thing that we needed to do, because a component is very nice, the view is available, but the user needs to get to that view, is update the document list component to register a new action. So that's the only moment in this process that we touch components that Alfresco provides, which is not really an issue. If you, of course, if the document list component evolves in the future, and you want to have some of that functionality, then you maybe need to migrate your changes to that. But basically that's not what the Alfresco development framework tries to do. The moment that you generate your app, the app is yours. It's not like Alfresco Share that you want to upgrade with every cycle. From that moment, that application is yours, and you mold it like you want to. And you just forget about that you're really using ADF to generate the app. So in this case, we just need to basically change two files. We register to the action in the HTML file to show it, to make it visible. And we added some logic to the controller, if I can call it a controller, just to redirect to that view and pass the node entry to it. The result of that, and just basically a couple of changes, you get a full-fledged application, because that's generated by the framework, with a document list view that we didn't have to develop ourselves. And there you see our custom all-in-one edit action. And then that form comes up with that two-column layout, and our TinyMC component comes here at the bottom. So I can edit metadata, and I can edit content at the same time. So it's very similar to what we saw and shared, of course. There's a proof of concept, not yet as polished as the other one was, but in very little time, you can create something like this, which for a lot of users that want a very focused user experience and want some small things done in Alfresco, you can have it up and running in no time, which is a great thing. And as we already reused the viewer from Alfresco, we out of the box already support viewing PDF files, viewing videos even, a lot of file types, as you can see here, for example, video voice as well, although it's a very static video. So that that's one use case. So you saw the user logs into ADF. It doesn't really know about anything else. It uses that application, and that's the world he or she lives in. But what if you want to reuse that in Alfresco Share? Well, basically, it's very simple. If we look at the next video, and this one doesn't autoplay automatically, I don't know why. Restart. Yes. So you see that same action, an all-in-one added action in Alfresco Share, and basically what happens now is you get redirected to that ADF application. Of course, now the design is very different, so the user might notice, but this is just a matter of CSS styling. The fun thing about this is that we can have very fancy components like a date picker. We can have validation on our fields, real-time validation, which is very difficult to do in Alfresco Share without jeopardizing that release cycle and going into the protocol of Alfresco Share. And you have that same experience throughout. So you can have a very specific application built with ADF for users that do some specific tasks in the system. And some other users, more powered users maybe, that use Alfresco Share, can reuse that same logic and reuse that same view without the need to develop it again. So, okay. Just be using slides. So let's reflect on what we did. So our experience with ADF was actually a very good one. So we are very happy with how it turned out. We are very happy with the focus it has. Like I said before, it's very different from developing within a product like we do now for Alfresco Share. Does it replace development for Alfresco Share? I'm definitely sure it's not going to replace it. It's a very different approach, and I'm sure that a lot of clients still want the power that Alfresco Share has and all those features in one big application. But for the ones that don't, we finally have an option to quickly start building a great application using Alfresco, an option that we didn't have before. The great thing about ADF is that it tries to be as non-intrusive as possible. So it's basically an AngularJS application, and Alfresco just provides you with some components that you want to use and a JavaScript API to connect to Alfresco. So for AngularJS developers that already know how to build components, how to build applications with AngularJS, they have a very low learning curve. Basically, the only thing they need to know is what components are available that Alfresco offers me, and if it's not in the list, then I'll probably build it myself. Another great thing about this approach is, like I said before, it's very flexible. I have basically no limitations on what I can do. And I can, like I said, quickly create an Alfresco application, which used to take me maybe months to have a simple document list with this functionality and a previewer, a file previewer in place. I can now do with a couple of months. Another great thing about this is that it's open source. So if I get to a point that the document list doesn't really do what I want it to do, I want to add some fancy features to it, but I don't want to really implement it from scratch. I can just use a component and start changing it. It's my application, so I can do basically what I want. And because it's open source, I don't need to hack around it. I have all the code available, so I can start tweaking it, and it's very self-explanatory. The guys have very great work in having really good code. Some of the downsides, which are probably just because it's still a very young framework, is that we need a lot more components to really have developers create something amazing in a very short time. So what we miss at the moment, like I said, the edit form component, which was for me a no-brainer, is still not there. Or we are going to contribute it, I don't know, or I have heard that in a couple of months there might be a component like that available. So we'll see what happens. So we definitely need more work there. And another downside is that you cannot use it with an old version of Alfresco Share, or Alfresco Share, that you don't want, with Alfresco repository or activity. And that's, of course, the good thing is it uses the new REST API, which is a very, very clean API now, and it was definitely necessary that that upgrade was done. So I understand why it is like it is. But it's just a bummer because we probably all have a lot of projects with older versions where we want to use ADF, but we probably can't without upgrading. And if you did a good job, maybe upgrading is very easy, but you never know. So what does the future bring for us at ADF? So I think in general, just before I go into Ixxus in particular, just in general, I think that ADF is a great tool, and I think it's a lot of potential, and I'm pretty sure that it will have a bright future in front of it. Without removing Alfresco shared development, like I said before, we probably will still see that for a very long time. For us at Ixxus, I think the proof of concept really proved that it is a very viable solution for us, and that we are definitely going to investigate this more. So we'll definitely have more components, more modules that we will try to migrate to ADF. Maybe even just only have an ADF version of that we can integrate with share like I showed you before. Regarding the all-in-one edit component, like you saw before, it still needs some work. It's a proof of concept. So the editor is just on the bottom of the page, or the file viewer wasn't really in the page like I expected, so it's a pop-up still. So we need to work on that to have it better in line in that column layout, to make it a bit more usable. Maybe support some more viewer editing formats than we have now. And maybe build some more components around and more widgets that we can use in the forms. And maybe another thing that we're thinking about, and I don't know if it's something that's usable or even useful, but it's something that's something we're thinking about, is if we really want to use share and we cannot integrate with ADF, so it's not really a viable solution for our clients, is there a way to have that code reused within the Alfresco share platform, that AngularJS code? That's something that we also try to think about, and maybe that's something that can help us in the future. So that's about it for me. So if you have any questions, now is the time.
So thanks. And you said that you are not trying to update components for Alfresco in your project. Why? It's not possible. We see that it's hard. Why not?
So the thing is, well, of course, now that we worked with the framework, it was still in beta when we started. So of course, now a lot of things change. In the future, probably less things will change. But I think it's just the core philosophy of what ADF is trying to do. At the moment that you generate an application, you generate your application. You don't generate an Alfresco product that you're trying to change. And Alfresco gives you a couple of components that you can start with, just to give you a head start, basically. But if you try to change them because they don't do exactly what you want, you're allowed to do that because, like I said, I think they're just a starting point. But at the point that they evolve, I just think that you need to, well, it's just more, I think, a matter of looking into it and seeing is it worth the effort to try to get to that new version, because basically what I have works perfectly. And like I said, it's my app, it's not really an Alfresco app that I'm trying to extend.
Any more questions?
Yeah, hey. I was wondering, are there currently any plans for supporting ADF for maybe versions like 5.1 or is it just supported for 5.2 and up?
Maybe I can take one. You want to answer all? Or
Yeah.
Yeah.
So overall, the ADF is based on the WooCommerce APIs, as you perfectly explained. And we did try some efforts to backport the APIs into the 5.1 code line. The problem is that the APIs has fundamentally changed the underlying Java services, which hooks into some of the underlying services and eventually even some of the database indexes. So backporting them is a huge effort. We did try and spend a few weeks to see if we could do this in some way, and we exhausted all options. We could not bring them in as a module. We could not technically bring them in as a service pack. So our hands are pretty much tied on that one. So in terms of backporting the APIs, that's not going to happen. The reason why, so that's one part of the answer. The other answer is the reason why we've been able to develop ADF so quickly is because the APIs are so clean and smooth. And on previous versions, they are not. I think everyone who's touched the old APIs in Alfresco, they can all attest to that they're not great. And the new APIs are really, really good and being consistent and performant and everything. So if we had to maintain a layer where we need to consider, well, you're on a 5.1, so you need to use these 200 different APIs with small variances, and we have to bring everything in together and will not perform as well. Well, that's okay. What if you're on 5.0? Well, then you have 210 different APIs you need to use, and there's some slight variances in it. And that whole maintenance and that compatibility is just going to take up a lot of time. And I'm not joking, this is going to be a huge thing for us to maintain. So we made the decision of saying we're on 5.2 only. This is a new technology. It works with the latest versions, and that's pretty much it.
I'm sorry, we only have time for one more question because we're already running late, so.
Yes, well, this is more or less regarding the previous question, but I'm looking forward for the future. What happens if I have an Angular application with the current components that you have, and you release 2 or 3 components? It is easy to include those components in my previous made app?
So Mary, it's probably not a question for you, but I would say yes. But we provide upgrade instructions. We follow firmware, so we don't do any backwards incompatible changes. But I'll let Mary.
Yeah, I think you pretty much said it. We are following semantic versioning, so that if there are breaking changes that will not allow you to upgrade from one version to another, we will make sure that we upgrade the major version of the component. At that point, you will be aware that there is some breaking change.